In this lesson, we'll have a chance to take a look at a lot of the common attributes that are found on nearly all Softimage light types. Okay, so in this scene, we're just going to use our little ship here for some demonstration. So let's begin by dropping in a very simple light. So just like we saw in our previous lesson, we can drop in any kind of a light by going up to Get, Primitive, and we'll use our light menu. In this case, we'll drop in just maybe a simple point light. Okay, now our point light, if you look, really doesn't look like it has showed up. But you'll notice that up here in my selection area, we do have a point light that is currently selected. So if I were to press the V key on my keyboard to switch to my Move tool, you can see there is actually a light here. It's just hidden right in the middle of my geometry. So I can just grab this light, move it up, and out of the way. Now, as I'm moving this light around, you'll notice that it really doesn't have any sort of an effect in the viewport. And that's because from some of my earlier lessons, I actually had this headlight option turned on. So if I disable my headlight, now I should be able to see the actual light sources and their effect directly within my viewport. So if I pick up a light and move it, we'll just sort of place it out here for now. As long as a light is selected, you have access to this property page here, and a lot of these attributes and these parameters are found on nearly all Softimage light types. Now, if you want to ever get back to this at any point in time, let's say you've accidentally closed that property page and now you want to get back to it, just simply select your light and now press the Enter key on your keyboard. That'll always pull that back up. So the main area that we're going to be focusing on is the set of attributes that are found underneath this soft light area. So again, this is where we can start to come in here and adjust a lot of these common attributes. So we have things like the light color. So if we were to change this to something more like blue, you can see our light reflects that here within our viewport. Again, this might be a little bit easier to see if I were to switch this from a texture decal to maybe just a simple texture, so that way we can actually see what the lighting looks like on these materials. Below this, we also have our intensity, so as we adjust this, we should be able to set just how strong or how soft our light is. You'll notice that while we only do have the ability to take this slider up to a value of 1, we could actually overdrive this. So if we wanted to type in a value of maybe 2, or as high as we want, we could go up and type in any value that we want and get this light as bright as we need it. Now, at this point, there's something very, very important that I want to point out to you. So looking at our viewport, we have this nice little blue light. However, whenever we render this, we're going to see something very different. So if I press and hold the Q key on my keyboard, draw out a render region, you can see that, again, this looks very, very different. Our lighting within this render region compared to what we have in our viewport, you can see this is nice and blue, whereas this has much more of a white appearance to it. So very, very important thing to remember, and that is that Softimage always comes with a light already set up in our scene. The problem, though, is that that light is not able to be seen directly within the viewport, or at least its effect is not able to be seen. But you can see once we actually take a render, that light effect becomes very, very prominent. So to get rid of this, we can go into our Scene Explorer. You can see here's our point light. Now above this, we have this light with this little gray H. That means that that light is currently hidden in the viewport. So this is Softimage's default light. So a lot of times what I like to do is just take this light and just get in the habit of deleting that. Now with that default light gone and deleted, now what we see within our render region is much closer to what we would expect. So again, always something that you want to keep in mind, the fact that Softimage does have a default light, and that typically, whenever you begin your light setup, this is something that you will want to come in and remove. So let's get back to our point light. I'm going to select this, and once again, press the Enter key on my keyboard. Now below this intensity, we have what's called the spread angle. Now the spread angle really only applies to a spotlight. So what that's doing is controlling the overall size and the radius of the cone of light that our spotlight has. So we can open that up or close our spotlight if we want it to focus in just a very, very narrow area, or if we want that spotlight's cone to be spread over a much, much larger, much wider area. So again, that's this spread. Below this, we have our shadows. Now, when we start to enable shadows, you can start to see now a little bit more of a shadowed appearance that starts to appear underneath this little ship. So as I grab my light and start to move that around, we should see our shadows start to move right along with it. Now below our shadows, we have what's called the umbra. The umbra you can really think of as being sort of like the transparency or the overall darkness of our shadows. So with this umbra set all the way up to 1, that essentially means that our shadow is completely transparent. At that point, it really becomes almost entirely invisible. So as we start to bring this umbra down to a lower and lower value, our shadows should start to become more and more opaque and much more dark. So as we start to compound the effect of several different lights, this is typically what we would expect to see. As far as light being completely blocked from these areas because of our shadows. Now, typically what we would typically do is come in here and start to use other secondary illumination methods, which we'll look at in some of our later lessons, but we would use other illumination methods to come back in and sort of fill in some of these darkened areas from these shadows and kind of bring some more of that light back in. But if you're sort of pressed for time, or if you're just looking for a quick result, you can sometimes get some somewhat similar results by just starting to bump up your umbra, and now it looks a little bit more like some more realistic light bouncing that's happening in here. Now, one last thing that I want to show you before we wrap up this lesson is the fact that we can actually take any of our existing lights within our scene and convert those to any other light type. So let's say I have this point light in here, and I decide at some point in the future, well, maybe I'd really like this to be a spotlight instead, or I'd really like to have a spotlight here. Well, instead of deleting this point light and then going in and trying to rebuild this all over again with something like a spotlight, what we could do is just simply select our light, and here in this light type menu, we can switch that from a point to something like an infinite or a spot. So if I switch this to a spotlight, now you can see our spotlight is up here, but it's pointing in the wrong place. So we may have to come in and use something like our rotate tool and now point and aim this spotlight right where we want it. Right, and now if I were to come in, maybe pull my camera back so that this is a little bit easier for us to see, we can now have access to things like this cone angle. So if we wanted to shrink this cone angle down and just have our light cover this very, very small area, or we could spread our cone way out and have that cover a much, much wider area. This is also, again, where we get back into our spread angle. So the spread angle, like I said, controls the overall size and softness of this cone of light. So with this spread set up to a higher value, we should see that this area becomes much, much softer and much more blurred out, whereas if we had the spread set down to 0, it becomes this really, really sharp, hard edge. But again, this spread angle is something that only comes into effect and is only used with our spotlight. Now, there are a few other attributes to be found within this. So we have things like our exponent, some other attenuation options. These will all be discussed in our additional course called Introduction to Lighting in Softimage. So if you'd like to get a little bit more in-depth overview over some of these other options, you can by all means refer to that course. So this has been just a quick overview of some of the different light options and parameters, enough to get you started with starting to set up some of your own lights and features like that. Now, in our next lesson, we're going to get down a little bit further and discuss some of the shadowing options that we have available within Softimage.